all aging is like the real reason we don't want to age is because aging means you're more likely to get a disease and you're more likely to die from any cause. And that's because you're losing resources. The older you get, the fewer resources you have.
Let's go.
Welcome to Citizen. We got a special guest today, Dr. Kirk Parsley, like the
herb.
The herb, yeah. You were a Navy SEAL. Now you're a doctor.
Yeah.
That's an interesting career path. So let's go back to the beginning. Where'd you grow up?
I grew up in Texas. First half of my life was kind of Beaumont, Houston Ship Channel, Kemah. Lived on Kemah Island for a while. My mom got remarried and we moved out to Katy, which at the time was nowhere.
Yeah,
it was like a couple of suburbs and like a rice farming town. Stayed there through 4 years of high school. After 4 years of high school, I was a sophomore by credits, and I got my mom to sign some paperwork when I was 17, and I shipped off to the Navy and didn't make it back to Texas until 2014.
What did your parents do?
Well, my father, I actually met my father at my wedding.
Okay. That's a common story for operators.
When I was 25. So he was never in the picture. I think he worked for John Deere, machinist or something. Okay. My mother, when I was a kid, when we were young, she was trying to go to college and trying to and working like as a cocktail waitress at night and stuff like that. And then when she got remarried, she worked for Delta Airlines, and that's pretty much it. And then by the time I left, I don't know, she did some other stuff with other airlines and things like that. But
and what was it you were getting into in high school if it wasn't school?
I liked cars.
Okay.
I liked girls. Liked girls a lot. I liked competing in anything that guys compete in, whether fist fights or football or track or weightlifting or whatever, doing stupid shit on motorcycles, whatever guys do. But I definitely have like some sort of learning disorder that's not really well diagnosed. Well, it was diagnosed, but non-specifically. They didn't put a name to it, but said you definitely have a learning disorder. And so I was a terrible student, and I always thought every year I was going to be better, and I was going to be a good student this year, and I was going to, like, next semester I'm going to get it, and it'd go the same way. So I was actually, I wouldn't say I was an amazing athlete, but I was kind of top 10% of the athletes of the school, but I was so bad at school that I had such bad grades, and sports wasn't really an avenue for me to keep going. But yeah, I did. I was told I was stupid, and they were grown-ups and I wasn't. So I thought, okay, I'm stupid. So if you're gonna be stupid, you got to be tough, right? So go out and be strong and tough and aggressive. And
that's what I used to tell my privates. You can be smart or you can be strong, son.
Yeah,
it's gonna be one of the two.
yeah. Life's tough. Tougher if you're stupid. But, so you need to be tougher.
Yeah, and you're a doctor now, so maybe they weren't right.
Turns out I wasn't stupid after all.
Well, I was the same in high school. I think I graduated high school barely with like a 2.1 or something like that, which is not great. Then I went to college 4 times and cumulative 397. It's like being challenged, I think, was the problem.
Yeah.
Like, this shit's boring. I don't need to don't make me memorize like 5 stanzas of a poem. That doesn't do me any fucking benefit. And I knew it. That's the problem. If there's a point of no return on self-awareness and intellect. I think that if you are not challenged, you're going to become a miserable wild ass, like just a wild asshole, right? As a teenage boy, especially. You know what I mean? Like you need something to focus on that matters.
And I think the system was set up in a way that it defeats the typical boy mindset, right? I mean, the educational system's completely feminized. Like, who are the good students? Little girls who like to do arts and crafts and like to read and like to be organized. And who are the bad students? Well, the boys who need to go out and do and learn things physically and figure out how physics works by falling off of stuff, and that's bad behavior, and the good behavior is this feminized behavior, which is part of obviously why we're where we're at as a society.
I mean, that and lower testosterone doesn't help, but
we've been pushing that down substantially. I've seen I've seen a huge change just over my career as a doctor. I've seen a big change, but it was a big change when I started. It was already a big change.
When did you start in medicine?
I started medical school in 2000.
Okay, yeah. So, and then precipitously changed since then. I mean, the average 21-year-old today has the same level of testosterone a 65-year-old had in 2000, give or take, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's like a 40% decrease per generation the last 2 generations.
Yeah, I know it's substantial. What's even more disheartening is, I still do that all the time. I work with, about 70% of my time I volunteer to treat former special operators. And of course, hormones are a big thing that I'm dealing with all of them. And so I'm seeing the labs on hundreds of guys per year, and I've been doing that, since 2008. And the reference ranges on the lab sets themselves, where they come down from the labs, go down every couple of months. I watch their numbers go down, and every 10,000 patients, they recalibrate their new standards. So what their reference range, what a lot of people call normal ranges, but the reference range is like what's considered usual and healthy. I was just commenting to my wife, who's a nurse practitioner. She does the same thing with women. I was just commenting to her yesterday. I was like, hey, look, the new high is 916. Last week it was 946.
What's the new low? Because it was 450. I think it's 350 now.
The new low, they've actually crept up a little. So the Framingham data, which is like where most valid sort of references come from, was 250 to 1100.
250? That's like an 80-year-old man, right?
Right. Well, so here's the thing that people don't take into account. The reference ranges for Framingham were purely observational, right? It's like they took a town that didn't have a lot of influx, didn't have a lot of people moving in, didn't have a lot of people moving out, had a reasonable amount of diversity in there, and they basically just took their blood and they froze it. They took the serum and they froze it, and then every time a new lab test came out, they said, well, let's see how it applies across the population. What was the average? So, and that's where there are a lot of reference ranges started. Well, the criteria for being in there was you had to be male, obviously. You had to have your testicles. You had to be 19 years old or older, and you had to be alive. That was it.
But not like under 55?
No. So if you fit those criteria, you hit that normal reference range. And so obviously the 250 was the 85-year-old guy in the nursing home who like pushing the remote, six form of exercise. And the 1100 was the 19-year-old.
Sure,
right? And then, I don't think it was too controversial at the beginning, but then obviously testosterone became this big performance-enhancing drug, and it got politicized in all the sports. And there's some really damning information about that. In fact, I'm pissed off at medicine in general. Like sure. I don't believe in almost anything that I was ever taught. But the most damning thing I've ever heard in my life, and I can't ever remember his name because it's just one of those word salads, Celtic name or something. And but he was the chair of endocrinology at UCLA, and he was the lead author on a study that was done at UCLA, Harvard, and Oxford, and it was like 30 or 40,000 men, and they tested them over 10 years, and they weren't intervening; they were just testing them. And then they took that bell curve of 250 to 1100, and they broke that into quintiles. Okay. And at the end of that 10 years, they just looked at morbidity and mortality. If you're in the upper quintile, you had the lowest rate, you had the lowest risk of any disease, and you had the lowest risk of death from any cause. And every quintile you went down, that doubled. So you went from 1 to 2 to 4 to 8 to 16. If you were in that 250 to, say, 320 or 350 or something like that, you were 16 times more likely to have any disease, 16 times more likely to die of any cause. If that were vitamin C, it would be medical malpractice to not keep you in that upper
100%, sure, yeah.
But because people used it to hit home runs and whatever, like it was controversial, and so they don't keep people up there.
But we know for an absolute fact that the number one predictor of cancer survivability is skeletal muscle mass. So why wouldn't one
number one predictor of longevity, period?
Yeah, in general. But so why wouldn't, obviously, right? Because cancer is cellular degeneration. Why would that not be painfully fucking obvious to everybody?
I mean, if you think about it, all aging is like the real reason we don't want to age is because aging means you're more likely to get a disease and you're more likely to die from any cause. And that's because you're losing resources. The older you get, the fewer resources you have. When you're 95 years old and you have like 20 pounds of muscle mass on you, and you don't have great blood perfusion, your cardiovascular system's atrophy and all that stuff, you can't handle very much of an insult. Sure, yeah. When you're 20 and you have muscle mass, you can fall off a building and get up and rub yourself off and get going, right? So, maintaining muscle mass, and it's not as simple as just testosterone, but that's a big player in it. Maintaining muscle mass, like, obviously should be everybody's goal. I mean, because that also improves your mobility, your flexibility, your ability to handle anything. And people don't have heart attacks because they go and try to run 10 miles. People have heart attacks because they're moving a refrigerator and it tips over and they try to catch it and their heart rate goes up, or somebody cuts them off at traffic and yells at them, and it's a sudden, more of a hit type of thing that kills people. And that cardiovascular fitness is, has to go hand in hand with muscle mass. You can't keep muscle mass without a good cardiovascular system.
Are you familiar with the blue zones on Earth?
Yeah.
Just for the audience's sake, it's the 5 places on Earth where people live to 100 years old most frequently.
Yeah.
And it's Icaria, Greece, Loma Linda, California, Sardinia, Italy, Okinawa, Japan, and Nicoya, Costa Rica.
Yeah.
And there's been quite a few. There's actually a Netflix doc on this. I'm not sure how. I haven't seen it, so I'm not sure if it's accurate or not. But I would imagine there's going to be high protein, and people are walking around a lot or lifting something. Just in their normal day-to-day life, it's probably more common there than other places. That would be my guess.
Yeah. Well, so there is some new data. I'm not super up on it. I'm a very simple thinker. I like to reduce things down to more and more simple concepts. But there is some data on that was cherry picked, sort of like Ansel Keys' studies. But what we do know is that staying physically active is the key to maintaining most of your physiology if you live in a place where people stay physically active, of course. I think one of the biggest factors for most of those zones, and I don't know a ton about their cultures, but I do remember reading that book a long time ago, that there's a lot of interest, there's a lot more socialization, right? So there's a lot more community. People support each other, talk to each other. They have longer, drawn out dinners, and so reducing stress is catabolic. Stress hormones are catabolic, meaning they're eating your muscle. Essentially, being awake is catabolic and being asleep is anabolic, if you want to be super simplistic about it. And so the more stressed out you are during the day, the more catabolic you are, the more inflammation you have, the more oxidation you have, the more cardiovascular disease, the less muscle mass you have, the poorer your physiologic functions are. So I would think that, as well as if you listen to those places, there's none of those really sound like a lot of places that are eating things that aren't food. Sure. Which is what most Americans eat most of the time, is things that aren't garbage. They're not even food. Like, your body doesn't recognize it as food. Like, your body can extract some nutrients from it, but it's nothing you evolved to eat.
Yeah, I mean, a good frame of reference is to not eat anything that didn't exist 200 years ago.
Right.
Right. I mean, I think that's pretty much safe for the most part.
Yes. Yeah. And so I treat private clients on an annual basis. I treat, like I said, special operators on an annual basis. I get a lot of questions about nutrition, and I'm like, you know what? I wish I could make this complex, but it's not. It's like eat food.
Yeah.
Eat what your great grandparents called food. You know, you eat meat, you eat fruit, you eat vegetables, you eat some nuts and seeds. Like it is really pretty much that simple. If I get somebody to eat whole foods, there's no way they're going to be obese. Like you can't get obese eating steak. Like even if you say I'm a meat and potatoes guy, I'm going to eat mashed potatoes and steak, you're not going to get obese.
Right.
You might, maybe you'll be 10, 15 pounds overweight, but you'll probably have 10 extra pounds of muscle. It'll all kind of balance out.
Yeah.
You know, you'll just be a big bubba guy.
You're not going to develop a bunch of visceral fat that attacks your organs.
Right.
Right. I mean, that's the key there.
And more importantly, you're not going to overexcite your immune system, right? This whole problem, the biggest problem with these foods that aren't foods is that our gut doesn't know what to do with it. Our gut lining doesn't know what to do with that. And that leads to cascades of inflammation. And inflammation, that's a disease state, right? Being mildly inflamed is mildly diseased. And when you have a ton of inflammation, say like a cancer, well, okay, now you're super inflamed. But it really is that simple. And you can't sell a lot of books and products on that idea.
On having family dinners and eating real food. Yeah. I mean, a couple of questions for you. One, if you look into the broader health fads that have happened the last 15 years or so, and I think a lot of it has been precipitated by people like you, military veterans, right? Who are like, hey, we had to be professional athletes in a high stakes game, like literally life or death. So we know kind of what we're doing here, and it's gotten out to the general population quite a bit. Now you see people like, Huberman and others talking about this stuff. Rogan talks about it all the time, but nobody talks that much about cortisol specifically, which is one of the things you're referring to right now, where it comes from, and then how to manage it downstream, because it is. Of all the things that are causing us problems, inflammation is the number one comorbidity, I think, right? So how are we?
I would say it's the number one nidus for any disease. Yeah. Right. If you can get rid of inflammation, you get rid of like 99% of disease goes away.
So how are we dealing with, one, where's cortisol coming from?
Yeah.
From modern America, and I mean the gut's part of it, but you can get into that, and then how the fuck are we going to deal with this stuff?
Right. Well, it's surprisingly simple. The more we talk, the more you'll realize that I'm going to say that a lot. Everything's surprisingly simple. There's a lot of money to be made in drawing attention to the complexity of things. But back up a little. When I went on to the military's medical school in 2000, I got commissioned to go to the military's medical school in 2000. Did first year residency in 2005, and then I went to the SEAL teams as their physician. And military guys, and the worst thing you do is put them on the bench, so they don't ever tell their doctors the truth, and they're just like, everything's fine, everything's great. I got there at a perfect time when we just received the funding to build the very first kind of sports medicine facility the West Coast SEAL teams had ever had. And we hired lots of great, smart people from the Olympic Training Center, professional sports teams, and all this. Then I was the dumbest guy around, and so then I got put in charge, right? Yep. So now I supervise everybody. And the SEALs would come to my office, and they would say, shut the door, and be like, hey, man, let me tell you what's really going on with me. Because I'd been a SEAL, and I'd been a SEAL recently enough to where there were plenty of SEALs there I'd operated with, deployed with, trained with, obviously had a good enough reputation. The guys trusted me. And they would say, hey, man, I feel like shit. My motivation's down. My sex drive's down. My sexual performance is down. I can't concentrate. I don't feel like getting out of bed, but they're SEALs, right? So they're going to get up. They're going to do it. I'm not sleeping well through the night. I'm doing everything they're teaching me. The nutritionist, I'm working with the nutritionist. I'm working with the strength and conditioning coach. I'm doing everything they're telling me. I'm getting fatter. I'm getting weaker. I'm getting slower. I'm getting dumber. And I didn't have any freaking idea whatsoever. I was like, I don't know. Yeah, I'm a Western trained physician.
Sure, yeah.
I know how to recognize and treat disease. They don't have any diseases. They're just not performing as well as they'd like. So I start by just testing everything I know how to test. Like every test I know how to interpret, go do it. Sent them to the hospital. They're getting like 17 vials of blood drawn, 98 lab values. Got in a lot of trouble for that. But I see this pattern, super catabolic, right? So basically, for anyone in the audience who doesn't know, like anabolic is you take small, simple things and you build big, complex things. So, you drink a protein shake, those amino acids get in your bloodstream, your body turns those into a muscle. That's anabolic. You starve yourself, you're fasting for 3 or 4 days, your other cells need amino acids, your body eats your muscle and turns it into amino acids. That's catabolic. So stress hormones are catabolic. And stress hormones are, by and large, cortisol, epinephrine, norepinephrine, and to some degree DHEA sulfate. And those are what we all know of as stress, and they get this bad rap because maximum stress hormones we call fight or flight, right? Fight or flight basically is your body saying, this situation right here is so dangerous, we're willing to completely destroy anything about ourselves to get away from this, right? Sure. We will eat ourselves, we will chew our own leg off, like we'll do whatever we have to. Our pain threshold goes up, our reflexes get faster, or we take in more air, like everything. We become superhuman to get out of that threat. Right. But there's a cost of that. We're eating ourselves, right? Sure. So you do that for too long and you die. So that's maximum stress hormone. But what cortisol does is it keeps you alert in proportion to your environment. If I put you in a cold, dark cave with no light, nothing to wake you up, and said, sleep as long as you feel like sleeping, you'll eventually wake up. No sound's going to wake you up. No light's going to wake you up. What's going to wake you up? Stress hormones are going to wake you up. At some point, those will be high enough to make you alert. If you sit around your house and you read, you're reading books, reading a book on your couch, you don't need much stress hormones. Somebody crashes their car into the front of your house while you're reading a book, your stress hormones are going to go really high, right? Now, the most anabolic time in your life is deep sleep. So right when you go to sleep and you go into deep sleep, that's when all of your hormones are being rebalanced and your stress hormones are essentially zero. And that's when you're getting better. That's when you're repairing from the day and improving. So the whole reason for going to sleep tonight is to repair all the damage I did to myself today and to prepare myself for tomorrow, right? And if I could do that 100%, if I could 100% repair, then 100% prepare for tomorrow, I would wake up exactly the same every day. I would never age. I would never be closer to disease. I could stay the same for the rest of my life and possibly live forever. We obviously can't do that. To the extent that we can't do that, we're aging. So if I get poor sleep, if I get drugged sleep, if I use alcohol to go to sleep, if I use sleep drugs to go to sleep, if I just get poor quality sleep or short duration of sleep or poorly timed sleep, tomorrow still comes at exactly the same time. I still have to do everything. Well, how do I do it? I didn't repair 100%. I didn't prepare 100%. All the same requirements are on me. I'm going to do that by increasing my stress hormones. Sure. Just like I would if I were in a gunfight, they would go higher, right? So I'm going to compensate by releasing more and more stress hormones, and then those are going to be catabolic. Those are going to make me more likely to have any type of inflammatory disease, autoimmune disease. It's going to eat my muscle. It's going to make my workouts less useful. All of that stuff. So essentially, the primary key to keeping stress hormones low is sleeping well. The other keys are just what you think of as lifestyle, right? There's sleep. You have to exercise appropriately. You can't do too much. You can't do too little. You kind of have to be in that Goldilocks zone there. You have to eat nutritious foods that your body can use to repair and stock all the shells, so to speak. And then you have to have some form of stress mitigation, which is what I was alluding to, these cultures that have big communities and everybody talks things out, or religious communities or faith-based or meditation or whatever. There's all sorts of things you can do to reduce your stress hormones in that respect. And that's the foundation. And that's the Pareto distribution right there. That's the 80% solution for 80% of the people, 80% of the time. And then you can set specific goals from there. Like, I want to be stronger. I'm a power lifter. I want to climb a mountain. I want to run an ultra marathon, whatever. Then you can kind of direct your performance in that direction. But really, the key to reducing stress is lifestyle, eating well, sleeping well, exercising appropriately and sufficiently and regularly, and then doing a mindfulness meditation of some sort. I work with, the big tough frog men, like the knuckle dragger guys they don't want to do anything that gay. Like, I'm not going to do any of that. And I say something like, I'll say, all right, well, this week I just want you to do everything with your non-dominant hand. Brush your teeth that way, or try to write that way, open every door that way. Why am I doing that?
I mean, it's the shower principle. It's doing something mechanical to take your brain off.
Because you can't worry about what's coming next. You can't think about yesterday if you're trying to remember how to open a doorknob with your left hand, or why you can't eat, or why is it so damn hard to eat with my left hand, right?
But this is something like creatives have used forever to stimulate creativity, to occupy the prefrontal lobe so your brain can do its fucking job for once, right?
And I mean, if you look at every religious concept about living a meaningful, joyful life, if you look at all the meditative practices, all of the spiritual woo-woo, the Buddhas, all of them, they're all talking about being in the now.
Yep.
Well, the reason you're in the now is because thinking about the future leads to anxiety, and thinking about the past leads to depression. Like, you made mistakes. The future's too complex. Like 90% of what ails this country, whether you're talking political, socioeconomic, like all the bullshit going on in the school system, like all that, 90% of what's going on, it's a complexity problem. Everything is too complex. And there's a lot of people who derive a lot of power and make a lot of money out of exploiting how complex things are, and convincing you that you can't possibly solve this without their help, because everything's too damn complex. And the health industry is notorious for that.
So historically speaking, there's pretty good research on this in the last 20 years that show mindfulness or meditation or mechanical distraction, or the shower principle, and prayer in the religious sense have pretty much identically the same physiological benefits to people, right?
Yeah. So
which should tell you something, right? It isn't. It doesn't matter which one you pick.
It doesn't.
It just doesn't matter.
It absolutely
as long as you do something. It's kind of like exercise. As long as you're doing something.
And it is a form of exercise, right? It's a. I think of exercise as I'm engaging in a deliberate practice with the intention of improving or maintaining my health, right? So that is a form of exercise. So if I can, and I tell people this all the time, because I lecture to law enforcement and DOJ, first responders. They don't have a choice, right?
They're barely getting by,
right? And they're working night shifts, and I'm just like, you're going to die 16 years younger. That's just the way it is. And you're not going to sleep when you should be sleeping, and that's damaging physiologically. And they're like, well, what can I do? What can I do? Well, quit your job. Short of that, all you can do is try to mitigate, right? And you try to mitigate by reducing your stress hormones at any point you possibly can, doing anything. There are supplements you can take that will reduce your stress hormones a little bit. There's mindfulness practice. You can take naps. You can get as much sleep as you possibly can, as early as you possibly can after you've been sleep deprived. There's all sorts of things. Improve the quality, the duration to which you can, and you can mitigate against all of that. But at the end of the day, it's all about just decreasing, what we'd call your cortisol curve. If I took your cortisol, your serum or salivary cortisol 5-6 times a day, I would see it go up and down throughout the course of the day. How high does it go up? How much cortisol you're producing over? And that's an easy marker. That's not the only stress hormone, but that's an easy marker for us to track. And exercise itself will reduce because of the release of endorphins, because of the release of dopamine, and because of anytime we move towards a meaningful goal in our lives, and we feel like we're successfully moving towards something that is a future we want, something we want positively, that actually measurably reduces stress hormones, because you're on the right path. You're doing what you're doing something that you value, obviously.
Yeah, it's so life is complicated. Obviously, most people can't just quit their job.
Right.
And I'm sure in our audience, we probably have a lot of people that work at night in security, policing, fire, so on and so forth. But some of this reducing that cortisol curve is a big deal,
Right.
and it's not people that work in cubicles all day too.
I'm sorry, what was that?
People who work in cubicles and shit
Right,
all day too.
yeah.
Like even during the day, you're working a regular 9 to 5, and you have that moment at 3 p.m. every day where you're stressed out because your boss is an asshole, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that shit builds up over time.
For sure.
But we do know plenty of research on this about mindfulness, and it's one of the things that we teach in interrogation sometimes, which is to say mindfulness can be effective even in the short term. We think of it as like a long-term thing, right?
Right.
But can it be effective in the short term? For example, the anticipation of relief from pain or cold or stress
Right.
will produce dopamine,
Right.
and make you feel, and analgesic as well, and make you feel better in the moment, right?
That's why when your coach says, one more, give me
Yeah,
one more.
yeah.
Well, I only have to
Yeah.
do one more?
Yeah.
And one more.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
one more, right?
Yeah, and it works.
And
I mean,
the count, and people doing their ice baths, and they have the countdown. It's like watching that tick down is like that. That's controlling their autonomic nervous system because they see an end in sight. Yeah,
yeah. I mean,
sure.
imagine. So if you're in one of the things we teach in like advanced year is like if you anticipate the relief from the pain that's happening, your body will release endorphins that will address that pain right now, right? It's like, all right, well, I can do that I don't have to get tortured for that to be effective. I can do that right now.
Right.
You know what I
Right.
mean? I can imagine being at home with my wife and kids and having a good time now. Like, all right, cool. Now I'm motivated again.
Well, you know what? I have this theory. I haven't been able to validate it because I'm not a researcher, but I see it clinically, and I've worked with a ton of guys that make me think this is true. For one, I think PTSD is brain injury. I don't think it's emotional.
I agree.
Disorder.
I think it's hardware.
I think it's
hardware.
It's a hardware issue, right?
Pituitary disorders in particular.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. And so we're messing with the brain, and we're causing all sorts of problems. I totally lost my train of thought. What did you say before that?
Fuck, who knows, man? You're the one taking notes. No. We're talking about relief from stress.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
And how it can happen in the short term.
Yeah. So when you start working with guys who are suffering cognitively,
Operator syndrome. So the head's been banged around a lot. There's heavy metals. There's a lot of heavy metals, and there's a lot of fucking pituitary damage.
yeah.
Over time.
So operator syndrome actually started as the SEAL syndrome.
Oh yeah.
'Cause I called it that. So when all these guys came in my office, I said, "Oh, it's SEAL syndrome because I'm stupid and I like alliterations, or whatever." And I'm like, "All right, SEAL syndrome." And then I know the guys who did the research and all that, and they did a great job of expanding on that. But yeah, the interesting thing, like you're talking about, is that the anticipation of improvement is itself improvement, and there's no way of getting around that. And I see this all the time when guys come to me and they're suicidal, or they're damn near suicidal, and their life's in the gutter, and you just give them one little kernel of hope, and you say, "Brother, have you had anything tested? Have you looked at any of your blood labs? Like,
That's the first thing you should
do. You know any?" And they're like, "No, I haven't checked anything." It's like, well, let me tell you, 90% of the guys I work with who have been in the teams for a while, like they're going to have hormonal dysregulation, and that affects how your cognition works, and all of a sudden, I see a huge mood elevation in this guy. He hasn't even done his labs. He's gonna take his labs. It's gonna be a week before I get his labs back. It's gonna be another week before I get him any treatment, and he's already started to improve. So I mean, to your point, the anticipation of relief is probably more powerful than the actual relief from what you're getting.
It definitely is.
Like, when I get your hormones back up, you're going to feel better.
Yeah.
But the anticipation of what that means, that really is.
And we see this in other medicines that have nothing to do with pituitary disorders as well. People get falsely better before the medication actually has time to take effect. It's because your body is doing what it does. Your brain is you alluded to it before, and I say this to people all the time. Your body, or your brain rather, is a complex machine that determines between threats and benefits. That's what it's made to do, right? It's looking for food, and it's looking for wolves most of the time. And if your brain is set to threat all the time. You're going to have cortisol and inflammation issues and all the things that cascade from that. Lack of sleep, inflammation is obvious, right? And cortisol especially becomes an exponentially bad thing because stress builds over time.
Stress begets stress.
It doesn't it's not like you have a ream of paper and like, oh, stress. No, it's the whole fucking thing.
Right.
And it builds over time.
And where I was going originally when I lost my train of thought is I have this theory that we've actually reversed in combat veterans, especially special forces guys, we've reversed the autonomics. Because when these guys are really freaked out, it isn't during traffic when somebody's road raging at them. It isn't when, whatever, the loud bang noises and all the characteristic things people want to say that associate with PTSD. It's when they're sitting in their living room on a Sunday and the television's not on and everything's quiet and they're just sitting there and they start shaking and they start freaking out. They're like, I don't know what the hell to do.
Yeah.
Because their autonomic systems are just like twisted in every which way, and they need a stressor. Like their brain needs something to process and something that's completely lost. In medical school, we learn the body and systems, right? And we learn that as a way to learn the body, right? It's an academic trick to allow us to learn a lot of information in an organized way. But the body doesn't have any systems. Like everything is impacting everything.
Sure.
And your brain is up here, right? But there's way more nerves in your peripheral nervous system than there is in your central nervous system, and there's more autonomic nerves than there are central nervous system nerves. So your brain and your body are all completely intertwined, right?
Including the intrinsic cardiac nervous system, like your heart has its own brain, essentially.
Right. That's what heart math's all about, right? The most fascinating principle I ever heard about. So, I started off wanting to be an orthopedic surgeon, so I did a ton of surgery during medical school and residency. I was fascinated by that. And as you do surgery, you dissect through something called fascia, right?
Yeah.
And fascia is just this useless material that's in the way of wherever you're going, and it's not really important. And everybody's like, I just get rid of the fascia, cut through that layer. And that was it was an aside. And then somebody finally did some research, and they're trying to figure out how in the hell is a horse so smart with a brain the size of a walnut? Mm-hmm. Well, inside of all of the fascial layers of a horse are tons of neurons. So they have, orders of magnitudes more neurons throughout their fascial layers than we do as a species. So they've developed a system to where their brain is spread across their entire body. Mm-hmm. But
octopus is the same way, by the way. But the entire body,
and it's all functioning. And it makes sense because you think if you've ever ridden a horse like on a steep mountainside and you're stepping over like loose rocks and logs and stuff like this, and his eyes are this way, and he's missing it with his back feet, and he's like, well, how the hell does he know how to do that?
Anybody that grew up in Texas knows that it's pretty hard to get stepped on by a horse. Why is that? Because he can't. His peripheral vision is not that great.
Right. They're looking straight ahead, and they're missing things with their feet. And they're like, it's pretty amazing. And so anyway, somebody said, well, let's apply that. As imaging got better, somebody said, well, let's see if we can apply that to humans. So when you get a high enough resolution MRI, you can see the fascial planes in a human. And guess what the fascial planes turned out to mimic exactly? The meridian system of acupuncture. So you have these ancient Chinese for thousands of years putting needles in these very specific places. And why were they doing it? They're causing a neurological stimulation in this fascial plane. So we all have that going on. Oh, sorry about that.
That's all right.
I did the faux pas.
So they're about... Like your brain's got about 100 billion neurons. Your heart has 40,000. Like that's odd.
Yeah.
Like to think about, because I would venture to say the vast majority of non-doctors, and maybe a lot of doctors as well, don't know this. They have no idea how this works. Well,
the vast majority of any honest healthcare provider will tell you that they don't know very much at all. I mean, I went through my phase in medical education where I thought I knew everything, and they taught me all the important things, and I was going to have the answer to every problem in the world. And then you actually start practicing medicine, and you realize, man, none of that stuff's true. Like it's all like a conceptual baseline to start from, but almost nothing that you think is true it actually ends up being true. The body, again, like I was saying, whether it's socio-political, economics, anything you're talking about, climate change. the world is too complex. The body is too complex. There's nobody out there who understands. I mean, the body is a complex system on top of a complex system on top of a complex system on top of a complex system. And you're going to say, oh, it's a mineral deficiency. That's what it is. Or, it's an ice bath deficiency.
Sure,
or it's a Prozac deficiency. Or no, there's a million things going on, and you have to think about what all those things are. And you have to be able to bring it back down to really simple concepts for people to work with.
Sure. The problem is with that is it's hard to monetize simple concepts.
It's very hard to monetize that.
So like the general concept of homeostasis, right?
Right.
Which is what you're describing.
Right.
It's notoriously difficult to monetize. People have tried. It's like, cannabinoids are what is it called? Not THC. What's the other one? CBDs, yeah. It's like, these will promote homeostasis. I'm like, maybe, right?
Right.
That's a bold claim, right? That's like, but a major component of that is the HPA axis, right?
Yeah, HPA,
like hypothalamus, adrenal gland, and pituitary gland. Right. And these are things that this is why I like all the research coming out of the veteran community, because it applies to everybody. We're not unique in this regard. Right. We just get exposed to it more. We work at night more than the average person. We definitely get more concussions, especially many concussions.
Right.
And we're exposed to way more toxic shit than most people. Plus all the stuff of just living an American life.
Right.
Which is, I've got plastic in my balls apparently.
Right.
Now. What the fuck, right? So that's what homeostasis really is.
Chaotic sleep is worse than chronic sleep deprivation too. Which is what we're...
Chaotic sleep meaning what exactly?
Meaning maybe you're going to sleep today, maybe you're not going to sleep today. Like maybe you'll get 10 hours of sleep tonight, maybe you won't get any sleep for the next couple of days. You're going to sleep during the day for the next 2 weeks. You're going to go back to nights. Like that's way worse than just like say working shift work constantly or something. Now, are you aware with the of the blast force? TBIs now.
Oh yeah, we knew back then. My last deployment or my deployment was 15 months from 07 to 08, and we knew even back then if you're within a mile of a 155 round going off, you're catching some overpressure weight from that,
right? At
least a little bit, and it was like, okay, well, there's controlled deaths every day,
right?
The fuck are we doing?
Right.
Like you don't think of yourself as having been blown up 300 times,
right?
But practically speaking, that's what's happening.
But you are right, and now we keep getting more and more dynamic equipment that can protect you more and more. But you're still the soft little marshmallow inside of the equipment, right?
We're a meat sack, yeah.
And so I don't know if you're familiar with Frank Larkin. Well, I'm going to mess this up. I think they're both Frank. I was in the SEAL teams with his dad. And then he was a younger SEAL. Larkin was his last name. I can't remember if they were both Frank or one of them had a different name. But he suicided. He suicided about 18 months after getting out. He knew something was wrong. He'd been evaluated by the VA. He knew something was wrong. He kept asking for help, begging for help, couldn't get any help. He suicided, but he suicided by shooting himself through the chest. Just like the NFL guy started saying, he said, I want my brain studied. Yeah. So his dad said, I'm going to get his brain studied. Stanford doctor studied it, and when he studied it, he saw these beta amyloid plaques across the entire brain.
Like CTE, chronic traumatic encephalopathy.
If you look at football players, they have them in the front and the back, where their head's hitting here, and then the back, and then the brain's hitting the back of the brain. So they have these localized regions where it's really common to have it, right? And which position you play, you can predict where, right? So we've always known that actually impact with the brain is causing this, but what we didn't understand was this shear force. So what they did is they made this, they're trying to figure out like, why is it everywhere? Like, why is it across his entire brain? So they made this completely transparent skull that was roughly the same out of a polymer, roughly the same density as the skull. And then they made the layers of the brain with different materials that had similar densities to what they were replicating. So you had the dura layer, and then you had blood vessels, and then you had gray matter, then you had white matter, then you had vesicles. And then they fired off an explosion inside of the room, and with high-speed photography, they watched the blast wave. And it's completely obvious once you think about it, because we've all seen pictures of blast waves and you see everything move, right? The car shakes, the trees move, the dust flies, but everything moves at a different rate, depending on how heavy it is, how dense it is, right? The mass of it. So what ends up happening is, well, the skull vibrates, the dura vibrates, the blood vessels vibrate, the gray matter vibrates, the white matter vibrates. but all at different rates.
Yeah.
And so it causes a shearing effect. And so every place it shears, that's damage. And your body lays down this beta amyloid plaque to try to deal with this chronic inflammation of that shear force. And
But then that affects, like, the brain is optimized for efficiency, right? So that plaque disrupts neuron firing, which means your brain will eventually stop sending signals out there.
Right. So what beta amyloid plaques in the brain are, and the reason, like, a lot of people are starting to call Alzheimer's type 3 diabetes, right? Basically, anything like, so you've heard of bone spurs, right? You've seen guys go, I got an X-ray and I have a bone spur. What the hell is that? What, your body made a bone that didn't belong there?
Yeah.
Does that make any sense?
No.
That doesn't make any sense. What happened is you calcified a tendon, or you calcified a ligament, and in an X-ray that looks like a bone spur. Well, why is that happening? Well, it's chronically inflamed, and your body's like, we're sending inflammatory products down there, cytokines, all these chemical messengers, all these cells, like, fight it. And finally, they're like, hell with this. Let's just build a brick wall.
Sure, yeah.
We'll lay calcium down. We won't mess with it anymore. That's what happens in atherosclerosis. That's what an atherosclerotic plaque that you can see a calcium score on. That's what that is. Your body just got tired of fighting that infection and did that. Well, the brain's the same way. Chronically inflamed, put a plaque in there.
Yeah.
We use a protein plaque, and it walls it off.
But the difference
but
is,
now it becomes non-functional.
Instead of your knee not flexing all the way, now your fucking brain doesn't work.
Now regions of your brain aren't communicating.
That's
anymore.
not great.
That's not great.
Right. Especially when it's like anywhere in the limbic system or anything like that, because then you start having real problems, right?
I mean, everything. Like, again, it's like everything impacts everything else,
Well, do we have any sense of prophylaxis and then how to treat this after the fact? I know for veterans, especially for people that are around exposures a lot, it's going to be tough.
Right.
For people who sleep's fucked up, it's going to be tough. But after the fact, some dude's out after 20, 25 years.
Right.
What's he do?
And I deal with this all the time. So there are some really promising things. One that's obviously very super controversial is psychedelics. But what we do know about psychedelics,
they'll blast through that calcium
from a scientific, measurable, quantifiable prospect. We can look at what are psychedelics doing. One of the things that psychedelics do is they reduce amygdala tone, and they reduce amygdala tone up to 90%. So for people who don't know what that means 90% of your anxiety goes away, 90% of your self-doubt goes away, 90% of your worry about everything goes away. And depending on which psychedelic you use, that's more or less durable. The reason all the SEALs, Special Forces guys do Ibogaine, because that can last up to a year.
Yeah.
It's like 9 months to a year if you have this decreased anxiety.
And then you see, like, people, I've seen, like, Marcus and Amber Capone's organization, vets. I've seen people that are hooked on prescription meds or on to fentanyl or heroin now. One Ibogaine treatment and they're done.
Right.
Like, that should be. That's insane.
It's notorious for that, and in fact, that's how all this got started. When I was the SEAL doctor, a couple of doctors from Mexico who were doing Ibogaine research came and
just south of you guys
and took me to lunch and said, "Hey, we have this drug that's great for curing opioid addiction." And I was like, "Well, I'm not allowed to give opioids to the SEAL team, so that's not a problem for us. That's not a big issue." But we keep talking, and they said, "Well, there looks like there might be some problems with PTSD." And I was like, "Well, I am interested in that." So I ended up, for long circuitous reasons, one of my best friends from the SEAL teams, I ended up getting him treated. His best friend was Marcus. He got Marcus treated, and then that's kind of how all this thing took off. And it is, that's the nuclear option, right? Ayahuasca does.
It's also the most effective.
It's definitely the most effective.
Most durable.
It's the most durable. Yeah. That's the important thing. It's the most durable, and it's the most well regulated. So when you do ayahuasca, you get like some schmuck making stuff in a cauldron, and you're like, it's about looking at you going, it's about this much, and you're drinking you're right. But it does very similar things. It's not as durable. Psilocybin, same thing. Very similar, but not as durable.
But the dosage is easier with psilocybin, right? And you can take it persistently
and
at a low dose.
They've reduced psilocybin down to, I think it's called psilocybin, which is like the salt of it. And so they're getting closer to like the Ibogaine principle of that. Like you can actually calculate a dose on that. But it's still not as durable. So you get the same benefits. Now the Ibogaine, what you're talking about with reduction of addictions, it seems like the ibogaine is a better, more so than all of them. They all do it, but the ibogaine is a better, what they call a reset of the receptors. So it like scrubs the receptors and kind of gets rid of that addiction, because a lot of it obviously is anxiety, right? Yeah. Your amygdala is saying, hey, I need something to settle me down, and that's the thing that I use to settle me down. So
and it manifests itself in physical pain a lot, which is confusing for people, frankly, right?
Right. Well, because pain is an emotion, actually.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
And so,
but people don't internalize that. You just feel like, oh, I scratched my hand. I need to fucking put some antibiotic on it, right, or whatever.
Yeah. And so all the psychedelics do those very similar things. Ketamine is that's a pharmacological trick to try to act like DMT.
Yeah, it's a dissociative, so it's not going to be
it's not going to
persist at all, right?
Zero durability. Yeah. It's like as soon as you're done with it, that's gone. And MDMA is a totally different way of going about it. It doesn't have nearly the same benefits. Not what we're talking about. Hyperbaric oxygen therapy has very, very similar effects. Decreases neurological inflammation. I didn't mention that. All the psychedelics also decrease neurological inflammation. But hyperbaric oxygen decreases neurological inflammation, increases neurotropic growth factors, which all the psychedelics do as well. So things like you've probably heard of, like BDNF, brain-derived neurotropic factors. There's also something called glial cell-derived neurotropic factors. So like just things that are causing your neurons to fire more, grow faster, connect better. And hyperbarics does those things as well, with the added benefit of it recruits stem cells. And then both the psychedelics and hyperbarics increase something called VEGF, vascular endothelial growth factor, and they will increase the blood supply. You will grow new blood vessels in your brain that will attach to regions that are poorly perfused and help you decrease brain inflammation in poorly functioning brain regions.
Do you need a full chamber for that, or do those gimmicky masks that Under Armour sells just go for a run with that?
No. You have to have the hyperbarics.
Okay.
And we can talk in detail about that if you want.
Sure.
And then there are also peptides that do this. Things like cerebrolizin do that. Cerebrolizin has almost all of those that I just mentioned. It has all the neurotropic growth factors. It does do the VEGF. It is an anti-inflammatory of the brain, and it does decrease neurological inflammation. It's being studied very heavily right now for TBIs and age-associated neurological declines of all types. I've been using it. I've been using it quite a bit in the last several years, and amazing results. And if you can combine those with hyperbarics, I don't think there's anything better.
I think, not to plug his product or anything, because it's in a bunch of different products, but I believe cerebrolizin is in Alpha Brain that Joe Rogan sells. I'm pretty sure it's one of the ingredients.
I don't know how well I don't know about that, but you need a lot.
Does it work orally, or do you have to take injections?
It's injections.
Okay.
So the protocols that I've been using, you need like 20 mLs a day, so that's like an IV.
Yeah.
And you need to do that 5 days a week for 4 weeks, and like that's kind of like the baseline protocol. That's for people who are just fairly moderate. Like if you had just been in a car crash and you had a huge brain injury, it would be more like 40 mLs a day for 8 weeks or something like that. So it takes a huge volume of this stuff, but it keeps working. All those neurotropic growth factors start changing things in your brain, and those keep working for up to a year. So your brain's getting better for an entire year, and then you could redo it annually. You could redo it every 6 months. You can combine that with hyperbarics. One of the things hyperbarics does that none of the rest of these do is recruit stem cells. You increase neurologic brain cell or stem cells in your brain by 800% with hyperbarics.
Good Lord.
And you have these neurotropic growth factors, and you have blood supply, and right, you have all of that. And all of these things tend to help you sleep better because you've decreased your anxiety, and sleep is the most anabolic time of your life. And now you can rebalance your sex hormones and anabolic hormones and all that other stuff. And then hormones themselves help. When I first started helping SEALs with their problem, their performance issues were largely around sleep. They were all using Ambien. They were all using alcohol. I got them off of that. With their help, we came up with a concoction of supplements that helped them sleep, that replaced the need for that. Got everybody who came in my office for help, got every one of them off of Ambien. Their free testosterone would triple, their total testosterone would double, their CRPs would drop down measure. Like everything catabolic would drop, everything anabolic would increase. and all they were doing was sleeping better and taking a few supplements that kind of supplemented their body's proclivity to making more anabolic hormones.
Sure.
And so all of those things help with brain injury. And then, of course, sleep is like the key. Sleep's like that foundation. You have to just keep harping on the sleep. So, all of those things will work. All of those things work better with sleep, and all of those things work better and last longer with sleep. And so really focusing your life around sleep is something hard for people to do. Mm-hmm. Like, we've been through things like, in our military careers, like whatever. Like I went a week without sleep. It was part of training. It was to prove to us that sleep is completely optional and you're weak if you need it. Yeah, right. Yeah. And that doesn't turn out to be true. It's like, it's a good screening tool. And personally, I think the reason the military uses that is because of the age group they're dealing with.
Sure. Quite a bit more resilient at that age.
Well, but if you're going to have a psychiatric break, if you have some sort of genetic issue, a familial issue, or some predisposition to a psychiatric break, it's going to be between 19 and 25 years old, and sleep deprivation is going to make it more likely to come out. So I think that's a lot of the reason the military does that, is to like, let's expose these people and get them out before we're in a bad situation and they're hallucinating on the battlefield.
Yeah, that sounds great. So I guess my question is, we have our cycle, right, of intense training cycle, pre-deployment workup, deployment, recovery, and then back into training.
Right.
Why isn't this part of that cycle for operators and infantrymen and EOD and artillery, at least those groups, and Cav as well, because they're in fucking tanks all the time?
You tell me, man. Like, I've been fighting
because it's not a money issue. We've got it's a fucking open budget. Like
so what it is, it's a leadership and priority issue. So when I was doing all of this at Group 1, Alex Krongard was the Commodore, and he was 100% into this, man. He sent out one of his best officers to go to Red Bull and these high-performing teams and, like, let's get everybody involved and figure out how we can optimize everybody. And we built that rehab facility, and I went down to the training sites, and we changed the lighting, and we darkened out the sleep areas and made it super cold and put red lights in when people should be. And everybody bought into it, and things were going great. And then the next leadership comes by, and he's like, it's a bunch of bullshit. I need more bullets. I need more this and that, whatever. We don't care about that. GS workers get disgruntled because they get put on the back burner for a while. They leave. Like, now you don't even have anybody to implement the program. So really what it is an educational issue. I'll tell you the story. This is not hyperbole. I went into my COXO Command Master Chief. I got in a lot of trouble for doing all this voodoo medicine because it was outside of my scope of practice. It wasn't what I was trained to do. Apparently, I'm not qualified to like do IV antibiotics and stuff as a doctor.
What?
Yeah, for whatever reason. Okay. I don't know. And so I went in their office and I was telling them, so you'll identify this, right? So tons of guys know they have low testosterone, right? And the leadership their opinion is, well, they have low testosterone because they abuse testosterone. At some point in their life, they were taking steroids to get big and strong, and now they quit doing it, and that's why they're having problems. And that's what they all believed. And I was like, that's not true. Right, because some of these guys I've known since I was 18 years old, and I know who they are, and I know what they do, and I know they don't do that. And plus, these guys trusted me, and they told me. The guys who took them, they told me they took them, and that doesn't last forever anyway. It's like you break yourself for maybe a year or whatever, but things come back. And so when I went in their office and I said to them, I think it's sleep that's causing our hormone dysregulation, and here's my rationale why. I gave them reams of studies, and I drew it out to them on the whiteboard. Like, this is what happens during stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, stage 4 sleep. This is when hormones are rebalanced. This is the trigger for it. This is how you know. This is how your body does it. And Ambien, when you take Ambien, it reduces REM sleep by 80%. It reduces deep sleep by 20%. When you drink alcohol, it does the opposite. So when I did sleep studies on SEALs, they had 99.9% stage 2 sleep. They had no REM, they had no deep. I'm like, this is what's causing it. And I've proven it, right? Before I went and talked to them, I proved it. I already had like 40, 50 guys All they did was start sleeping better, get off a sleep drug, taking DHEA supplements and zinc and like whatever, easy stuff. Few of them had on the Remedex. Like that was the most crazy thing I did. And they literally laughed me out of the office and told me that was the dumbest thing they had ever heard, and I needed to go back to medical school. 5 years after I got out, SOCOM hired me to come and lecture all of their medical providers about everything that I was trying to convince them about of then. So that's the problem. Like it's within the bureaucracy, right? It's like anything else. Like why is there a border problem?
Yeah.
Like there's no logical reason for that. I mean, that's a leadership issue.
Well, you know, for the past 6 months or so, Biden's been saying it's Congress's job and it's out of his hands. But he's getting ready sometime in the next week or two to sign a new executive order that says
I heard he signed it today.
Once it gets to 2,500 now instead of 4,000 a day. It's like, oh my fucking God, dude.
Whatever.
What are you talking about?
Yeah, it's all stupid.
I mean, Trump literally just did it.
Right.
He just signed a fucking piece of paper and was like, all right, it's closed.
Well, he acted like he needed to invent new laws.
Yeah.
No, all you have to do is enforce the ones we have.
Yeah.
Like, that's it.
I mean, unlawful presence is already a crime, brother.
Yeah, it's already there. And you can't even call them illegal. It's like, but it's illegal. They're
Tom Homan, who was he was an active DHS secretary for a while.
Yeah, I know.
He's lit them up on the congressional floor. They don't invite him back for testimony anymore because he's like, just no, sir, you're wrong.
Yeah,
sorry.
He's straight up.
Yeah,
he's intense.
He's a good dude.
But he tells it like it is. He's a good communicator.
But people like you who've gone out into the wild, into the wilderness to some degree, and learned new skills and brought them back for the military have been notoriously, not PNG necessarily, but you've been fucked with quite a bit. I mean, Charlie Beckwith, the guy that went over to 22nd SAS and was like, we need a CT unit in America. He is responsible for Delta and Dev Group for the most part in the current constitution that they are.
Yeah.
But it took him, I think it was 15 years to get them to actually do the work.
Yeah.
Because they were like, come on.
Yeah.
What do we need that for? We already got special forces. What do we need that for? It's like,
they were talking about JSOC when I was a young SEAL, so like late 80s, man. And when did that really kind of
Charlie went over, I think, between 68 and 72. He was with 22nd SAS during that time period. Wrote multiple white papers, wrote a second white paper in 75, and it was like, come on, man, stop rabble-rousing. It's like, I'm trying to tell you that we need to fucking do something here, buddy. And then the Beirut bombings in 83 obviously helped precipitate a lot of this stuff and finally get them to, well, 79, they did it because of the Iran hostage situation, or before that, but it was becoming clear that we were going to have some issues moving forward. The Munich thing, some other things, right, made it obvious we're going to need it. But goddamn, do we always have to wait until something happens to do the right thing?
Yeah, I think we do. I think we have to do the wrong thing to the point where it gets unbearable, and then people go, okay, I guess we did the wrong thing. Let's let the pendulum swing back. A great example when there's all this bullshit. I'm sure you saw that freaking thing a couple of days ago, that NSW gay pride thing. Jesus Christ, right? Yeah.
I'm sure that made everybody very
proud.
Oh
my God, there's so much smoke about that right now, and I'm part of it, man, because it pissed me off. But this isn't new. Like I graduated BUD/S in 1990. When I went to SEAL Team 5, every Friday, Monster Mash PT, field day the command, XO came and inspected, released everybody, all clear, keg party, barbecue, horseshoes, cornhole, volleyball, whatever. Everybody stayed in the compound, hung out together. Everybody in the team knew everybody. When it got dark, everybody went to Danny's or McPee's or whatever. Hung out together all weekend. Dudes lived in the platoon space. They'd be like, hey, I'm only here for 2 months. I'm not going to get an apartment. There's 4 or 5 guys living there. Sure. And then a few years after I'd been there, it was like somebody decided that we were a bunch of racists and sexists and we needed support. There wasn't a single person in that compound that wasn't a SEAL, right? So when we came back from, you do 3-4 deployments and then you go do a shore duty. Yeah. So if you're a radio man, you go and work. You go work there. If you go work in the armory. You go. I was a first lieutenant guy, so I go work on boats and motors, whatever. Like, you get your 6 months of shore duty or whatever. You go back in another platoon, and that's how. And we did all our own support. We didn't have enough money. We couldn't have scaled to what we do now that way. But then they brought in 100% minorities and women. Every single person who came in. And of course, all the women were having sex with some SEAL within a few months, and then like all of the minorities were offended by somebody, and within 6 months it's like you can't walk out of the shower with your towel. You gotta wear underwear with your UDTs. You can't say this. You can't say that. There's no more sex jokes. There's no more race jokes. And by the time I left, Friday was Monster Mash PT, field day, and sneak out the back gate.
Yeah.
And then the only people you knew were people in your platoon. And maybe your sister platoon because you went off site and saw that. But it's like, when I first got there, I knew every single guy at Team 5. I knew where he lived. I knew what he did. I knew what he was into. By the time I left, I knew the guys in my platoon. And it completely changed it. So this is nothing new. It's just like, it's just getting worse and worse and worse. And it's going to get bad enough to where people go, all right, like, we need to,
well, people are doing that.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know about the SEAL teams, but Army Special Forces is having serious retention problems.
Yeah.
So much so that they have this, when you're exiting your career, you get 6 months for an internship now, right? Which is DOD wide. It's for everybody. It's not just the Army. Now they're withholding that from people because they're having retention problems. They can't fill billets anymore. And Special Forces, which used to be like people, the what do you call it? The attrition rate for is about 70% for selection, right?
Right.
That's just for selection. That's not including the Q course and all the other bullshit. So it's like never. It's almost like the Marine Corps. They've historically been immune to retention, not just retention, but recruiting as well.
For sure.
Because it's exclusive, right? That was part of it.
Yeah.
Now it's like even the exclusive roles we can't fill. That's really bad.
It's slowing down a lot in buds too. Like I couldn't even.
Buds is 88% attrition or something like that, right?
I couldn't even get into buds now. I tell you what, I wouldn't have enough qualifications. Like when I went through SEAL training, nobody knew what the hell a SEAL was. And they're like, "You're dumb enough to sign up. Go ahead, we'll let you try."
Good luck, asshole.
Yeah, good luck. And like we had no idea what we were getting into. It was like, okay, and we're gonna go this really tough thing. And then post 9/11, SEALs whatever got all in the media, did some high profile things, and now you had guys with freaking PhDs and masters coming in as enlisted just to be competitive to get into the program, and now that's like dripping back down, and it's just like having a hard time getting by. Having guys back in there and trying to keep the teams up. I'll tell you a terrible story. I was in this offsite with a bunch of, younger SEALs, meaning younger than me. They're in their 30s, and one of them had just gotten out with 15 years, and I was like, "Wow, why'd you get out with 15 years?" And he was just like, "I just couldn't handle the bullshit anymore." And I was like, well, "What is the bullshit? Let me know." So he had been sent to some DC job that, of course, he didn't want. He's a SEAL, so he's like, whatever.
They just want somebody with a trident walking around.
Right. So he's in some DC job, and then he's in this DC job with another guy that he's known, I think, since Buds, or like he's known a long time. And the reason he got this DC job was because he'd been diagnosed with a thyroid disorder, and he was no longer deployable because he needed a thyroid pill. And he was, of course, pissed off about that, which is stupid because you can go like 6 months without taking a thyroid pill and still be functional, right? And so he's there. While he's there, his buddy that he's known, hanging out with him all week, talks to him on Friday, actually saw him on the weekend, on Saturday. Monday he comes in and he's a girl. And he's wearing a woman's outfit, a woman's uniform. And there's a command sort of, whatever, presentation that this guy is now a girl and you're going to treat him as such. And he's on, whatever, transitioning hormones and all this other stuff. He's on a list for surgery, and he's still deployable on hormones. And my buddy's like, "What the fuck are you? I can't deploy for thyroid. This guy's being converted to a woman on hormones, and he's deployable." And then a few months after that, it wasn't money, but the other sicko that was involved in the whole gender.
Which one? Shit.
Like the starting of the gender thing. So Money was the guy who raised the twins and was all perverted. But there's another guy.
Oh yeah, I don't remember the name.
Aaron or someone with an A or something. The Navy renamed one of their ships that was named after a Confederate general. So they renamed it to that guy, and he's like, "All right, that's it for me. I quit." And he just turned in his papers and left. So I don't know exactly how big the attrition problem is and how big the retention problem is, but I know that it's not the panacea and place everybody wants to go like it used to be.
That's retarded.
That's retarded.
The job is to close with and destroy the enemy, so far as I recall. I mean, I remember getting yelled at and having to yell that really loud at basic training.
Yeah.
Right. But maybe it's changed, I guess. Maybe war is different now.
Well, I'll tell you what. I
mean, it still seems like a two-way firing range to me.
Yeah. I just went this past weekend. I went shooting. You probably know the place. It's Tim Kennedy and his boys go out there.
Oh, Reveille?
Yeah. So I went out there shooting.
You're talking about the National Guard place that the private guy owns up there? I mean, the National Guard just use it sometimes. Yeah.
And so there's just a group of former team guys and a couple other dudes went. And there's a kid there. He's like 22, 23 years old. And he actually went in the Navy to become a SEAL. Mm-hmm. Went through boot camp, and then he got put in holding because he had some sort of genetic disorder about processing phenylalanine or something really stupid like that, and they ended up booting him out. But he was riding with us, and so on the way home, we were just talking about the stuff, and he said when he was in boot camp, they weren't allowed to use the word he or she, and all of their cadences, if it required a he or she, they had to say they. And he said that every single day there was some point where the drill instructors or company commanders, whatever they were calling them, would put aside the snowflakes and publicly apologize to them for something that had been said or done that could have possibly offended them, because some of them, and that's in the SEAL pipeline, right? Because the SEALs have their own boot camp now. So that was in that pipeline that was happening. And I was like, all right, well, I don't know why you're fighting so hard to get back into that. I wouldn't do it.
Man.
I discouraged both of my sons from going to the military. I said,
what are they doing now?
I wouldn't do it. My younger son's going into the fire academy in San Diego. Okay. And my older son...
Cal Fire, by the way, the best in the world, in my opinion. Yeah. Right? It's the best. I did a bunch of emergency management training with them over the years. Okay. Of all the stupid shit that goes on in California, Cal Fire's got it pretty locked down.
Oh, that's good. I don't know much about it, but he wanted to play football, so he wanted to play D1 football. So he went to football for 3 years, and it's like, I'm done with football. And then he went back to San Diego and started training for that. And then my older son, he graduated UCLA's television and film writing program, so not like a super promising career, right? But he's doing that, and he's teaching on the side, and he teaches martial arts, and he's just up there like trying to make a living out of that. Yeah. But yeah, he's happy.
I've told people the same. Like I think actually Jared Taylor, one of the founders of Black Rifle, buddy of ours, he's actually one of the drinking bros as well. He thinks that the recruiting issue is largely a legacy issue, right? Which is what you just described. Yeah. Typically speaking, in past generations, a guy like you would have walked his kids into the fucking recruiting station. But like you don't have to be a SEAL, but you're going to be something. You don't have to join the Navy, but you're going to join something, right? And not only is that not happening anymore, but if I had kids of that age right now, I'd be like, no fucking way. I'm not going to tell you to do something I wouldn't do.
Right.
Fuck that. Yeah. Right.
Well, and
go be a sheriff's deputy or something. Serve your community some way, but don't do that.
And another thing is, like, if your father was a SEAL, they have stats on this, like, because they've been trying to solve the problem of attrition and buds forever, right? Because, I mean, if it
costs a lot of money.
Yeah, 88 cents of every dollar is wasted, right? Yep. So it's like, how can we predict success? And I want to say the sons of SEALs have like a 90% success rate or something crazy like that. Like it's really, I mean, that's really up there.
Inverse of the attrition rate.
Right. Yeah.
Shit.
Which makes sense. It's like, you hopefully, if your father's around, you grow up with kind of like that, the right kind of mindset that gets you prepared for that and increases that mental toughness. But yeah, I agree with you 100%. Like, why would you send them to do something you wouldn't do? And I can tell you, like I said, I treat a ton of former military, like ton of retiring SEALs and SEAls that exit for whatever reason. But I do everything I can to kind of bolster their health so that they have another 20, 30, 40 years to do something else great, and they aren't like a broken bag of shit, from their career. And it was amazingly more positive before that Afghanistan pullout. And now, like, the amount of cognitive dissonance of these guys is like what did we just waste all of that time? Did all of my buddies just die in vain? Does anybody actually believe in the reason we were there?
Yeah.
Was I duped over this whole thing, right? And it's easy to do. You get in a dark spot and you start seeing stuff like that, and then you just like going, well, shit, man, nobody likes us anyway. Like, we're all a bunch of right-wing Christian extremists that are a threat to democracy and like all that stuff, right? So it's not what it used to be.
No, it's
we have that saying in the teams aren't what they used to be, but then again, they never were.
Yeah. Well, we got to get out of here soon. But before we do, people are looking for help with this. A lot of people are.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of snake oil out there, frankly. It can be in the same way that dealing with veteran charities, or any charities to be frank, but especially for some reason veteran charities.
Right.
There's a lot of assholes out there trying to grift.
Right.
For somebody that's looking for help and what we're talking about today, where do you recommend they go for that help? And how do they tell if that person's legit or not?
Yeah, so unfortunately, I don't know a whole lot about it outside of our community. That's a full-time job for me, helping those guys out. I think all the SEALs know there's good foundations that are helping with that. I know there are a couple of really good Army guys that I've worked with in the past. I'm gonna blank on his name. There's a Green Beret who worked with a buddy of mine named Mark Gordon, who was on Rogan. What the hell's his name?
Andrew Marr.
Andrew Marr has a good organization. I know they help.
Are they in Dallas? Is that where that is? Where's his organization?
I can't remember where he is. I met him way back when I was still in San Diego, but he's got a good program. I know they
Defined by Action.
Yep,
is the name of that.
Then there's the Mighty Warriors Foundation. I know that are offering a lot of help, and I think if you kind of call any of those organizations, there's people here in Austin. There's one called Illuminating Heroes that does psychedelics. They have, like, if you're interested in that pathway, they have like a legitimate program where there's counseling involved and screening, and it's medically based and all that stuff. But yeah, unfortunately, the VA is not the solution.
No, there's Heroic Hearts Project.
Heroic
as well.
Hearts, yeah.
There's Vets, which is Amber Marcus Capone.
Yeah, Vets for psychedelics. For Ibogaine specifically, Vets does that.
And they're working pretty hard to get that all legalized here in the States. So you don't have to travel anywhere weird to do it anymore. Yeah,
they unfortunately, I heard just yesterday the FDA declined the rescheduling of MDMA, which everybody was 100% sure was going through.
It was 100% legal until 1989.
Right.
Like, just legal. You could buy it from any doctor, basically, right?
Well, the piss off of the whole thing.
I mean, what's the negative? I mean, draining your serotonin repeatedly is not a great idea.
Right, but
we do that anyways.
If you're doing it clinically, right? They aren't letting people come into an office and do it supervised. But the piss off of it all. Like, the only reason I know anything about politics is because of COVID. Like, I never followed any of it. I just figure I don't know enough. I don't know anything about economics. I don't know anything about history. I don't know anything about the other countries. So, like, I didn't follow it. COVID exposed to me how bad everything and how corrupt everything is. And now I just see more and more of it, and it's ridiculous now. But if you look at the charter of the FDA and the DEA, they very specifically say if a compound exists in nature and you can put it into your body unaltered, it is not a drug. They cannot classify it as a drug, but yet testosterone's a drug, estrogen's a drug, mushrooms are a drug, marijuana's a drug. Alcohol's not a drug. That has to be made into something, right? That has to be manufactured. So I don't have a whole lot of hope for it, honestly, because I don't think that Big Pharma is going to allow the competition.
Yeah.
I can tell you from personal experience, from working with tons of vets, from working with, I have several doctor buddies who are neurologists and psychiatrists who have started using psychedelics in the last 5 or 6 years, and they're like, we don't have anything that's within 3 or 4 orders of magnitude of how powerful a psychedelic is. In one session, we can keep somebody on drugs for 6 years and talk to them every day, and it's not as powerful as like one good session of this. So I don't think pharma wants the competition.
Certainly not.
I think that's I genuinely, I would have felt stupid saying that before COVID, but now that I've seen their hand, I'm like, yeah, for sure they'll block it. And I can almost guarantee you that's going to happen with all of them.
I would assume so, right?
Yeah.
I mean, they're going to at least fight until the bitter end on that stuff.
Yeah.
But
and they fight compounding pharmacies, right?
Yeah, a bunch of compounding pharmacies, a lot of people don't know this, have been shut down over the past, 4 years, which is kind of an odd coincidence, isn't it?
So my medical malpractice attorney, his father was the very first compounding pharmacist in America. And he spent his entire life fighting the FDA and DEA. He was arrested 7 times.
Jesus Christ.
Came to his house, frog marched him out, all this other stuff. He finally retired at 64 years old. He had 10 clinics. He sold it for like $100 million. He died 6 months later. And he just spent his whole life fighting the system. And I've seen this, because what I do a lot with hormones. I do a lot with peptides. I do, a lot of sort of non-traditional things. There are not only a lot of them you can only find at compounding pharmacies, but a lot of them are just so much cheaper that it's ridiculous.
So the difference between buying synthetic testosterone oil and buying powder and reconstituting is 100x in a lot of cases.
You can buy a completely constituted vial of testosterone, 10 ml vial for $30. You go to CVS, that's $400.
I mean, on the cheap end from like Peptide Sciences or something like that, which is a pretty good website for people, but that's going to cost you $150 at least, right? Not $30.
Yeah, that's getting expensive, and you don't know exactly what you're getting, and like there's quality control issues. So fortunately, my wife's a nurse practitioner. Fortunately, she does all the admin because I'd be a homicidal maniac.
Yeah, fuck that.
But that is the biggest time suck of my career, is playing the game of going, which pharmacy has this now, which one will ship to that state. We're relatively
lucky here in Texas because Empower's in Houston and they do a decent job.
Empower's good, yeah.
But even they have problems. Well,
the FDA just cracked down on them on a lot of stuff.
They've been out of Somorelin for like 8 months or something like that, which is something a lot of people take.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff they're not going to bring back until the FDA lightens up on it. They banned 12 different compounds. So the way I have to get it now is I have to say I'm doing clinical research, and I get it from a research compounding pharmacy that's
what Peptide Sciences is too.
Right. And so then
not for human use.
Right.
Is what it
exactly.
Says, right?
So now I'm doing research compounds, and then those dry up because raw ingredients dry up. And TaylorMade was this great compounding pharmacy for a while, and they just got destroyed by the FDA. They literally stormed them with 100 agents and Bearcats and all this stuff, and took all their raw compounds. It cost them $30-40 million to just stay in business.
And people have seen over the past couple of years exactly how the FDA operates. Everybody from the New York Times, which is not exactly friendly to the people, in my opinion, to American people, but they've done an expose on this. Former newspaper. Yeah, former newspaper, yeah. They've done an expose on this where the FDA, the vast majority of their budget comes from the drug companies.
Oh, yeah. Right? I read a book about that
bill back in the day.
20 years ago.
Yeah. It was like 30 years ago. They passed that bill where the drug companies are required to pay for the research done by the FDA. Yeah. So now they're just bribing people directly.
Right. And another thing that people don't know, this is how so much bad crap happens. When a pharmaceutical company develops a new drug, they do the research, they own the research. When they apply to the FDA, they give the FDA the research they want to give them. They don't give them all the research. They give them what they want to give them.
And a couple of bucks, right?
And then a lot of money. And then when they get sued, if they get sued, then they have to show all the research, and that's when it comes out, well, they knew this all along, and then that's where the big lawsuits come from. That's what happened with Ambien. That's why Ambien got so crushed. Unfortunately, that was all happening right around the time I was working with SEALs, and so I found out what Ambien was doing. But yeah, it's crooked as hell. A book, I think the book that I read was written in like early 90s. I read a long time ago, and it was literally like 85% of the FDA's budget was from the pharmaceutical industry. Yeah. And it's worse than that. You look at the positions, like the C-suite of the pharmaceutical industry, and then
just a revolving door.
The FDA
between the two
employees,
orgs.
it's just like it's a revolving door.
Same thing with the SEC.
Yeah, insane.
It's crazy. And then we find last week, this news comes out that NIH doctors got $700 million from the pharmaceutical companies to push the COVID vaccine. $700 million in kickbacks. Right. That's like, we don't have a healthcare system. We have a drug cartel, essentially.
We do not have a healthcare system. That's my biggest pet peeve, and I tell people it was gone before, but they completely destroyed medicine during COVID. Nobody believes medicine. The shit that I read during COVID, I would have sworn to you would never happen. Yeah. I would say this would never happen. And you had in Nature magazine, it was one of their most esteemed professors of some Ivy League school. I can't remember. I think he whatever. He was a very well published, very well respected doctor. I want to say he was a virologist, but he published in Nature magazine that natural immunity was a right-wing conspiracy.
Oh shit, you don't say, huh?
And I was like, really? So how did we make it this far? Like, how did we get here before the pharmaceutical industry?
Before antibiotics?
Yeah, it's like several billions of years. Like, we've been around hundreds of thousands of years just like this, and we didn't have. How did we make it this far? And there was so much bullshit. Yeah. And when they started talking about vaccinating kids, I was just like,
yeah, man,
I don't know what's going on anymore, because that's not even a money play. There's something really, really sinister going on there, and I still haven't figured out what that is. But that's
I don't either.
It's a mess. It's a terrible mess.
I guess we'll find out at some point. But the good news is, unless you currently have some serious life-threatening illness, you can the prophylaxis stuff that you can do, mitigating factors, are common and not terribly expensive, to be frank, right? Yeah. I mean, for most people, just eating good food and literally a brisk walk that's 15 minutes per day will stop most things, right? Yeah.
Well, something similar to vitamin D3, right? Not a single person hospitalized with COVID had adequate vitamin D3. If you had a vitamin D3 of 75 IUs per milliliter, not a single person with vitamin D3 level was hospitalized.
So maybe just take a walk outside once a day.
It's hard to get, actually, especially as white folks, just further from the equator. I think almost everybody needs to supplement.
What would you supplement with? Just
I do a D3K2. Just it tends to help with the. And I usually put people on anywhere from like 10,000 to 20,000, depending on how low they are. Then once they get up between like 75 and 100, you can usually get by with like 5,000 to 10,000 a day. It's freaking dirt cheap. It is dirt cheap. Like I sell a month supply of my business for like $10. Like it's super, super inexpensive, and it's just really hard to get. Because we evolved to be walking around nude in the sun, and we just don't do it. And so it's one of those things. Just like all the environmental toxins, like. You can't avoid those. You have to you have to do compensatory things for those as well.
Well, that's all really good information. And in addition to that, the sleep, a lot of stuff trickles down from sleep, I think.
Sleep's the foundation of all of it.
Yeah. So, and you're not really here to promote it today, but you do sell a product called Sleep Remedy. It's at docparsley.com.
Yeah.
And tell me about that product and what it's going to do for people.
Yeah. So like I said, when the SEALs first came to me with their problems, I had no freaking idea. I'm just like, oh no, let's test everything. I didn't know anything about sleep. I never had a single class on sleep in medical school. And so I started learning about sleep, and I started learning about what happens when you sleep. And I was like, oh, well, that's where all your hormones are balanced. Maybe that's an issue. So then I started looking, well, how does Ambien affect sleep, and how does alcohol affect sleep? And so I said, let's just try getting all these guys off of sleep drugs. Well, they were taking sleep drugs because they couldn't sleep. So I couldn't just say, suck it up, buttercup, go sleep. And so I just did super conservative traditional medicine, Cochrane database kind of crap. And I just what supplements have been proven to help with sleep. And so I go down the list, and then you figure out, well, why would that work? Why would that work? And you go, okay, well, shit, that makes sense. So most people know now that the circadian rhythm is set through the blue light, right? So when the blue light decreases in your eyes, that's the trigger for melatonin. Melatonin does not make you go to sleep. Melatonin initiates thousands of cascades that later make you feel sleepy. And so you want a very, very, very small amount of that, but you want the ability to keep making melatonin throughout the night. Sure. And then one of the primary things that happens from melatonin is the increase of the neuropeptide called GABA. Most people have heard of that, capital G-A-B-A. And that slows down the neocortex, right? So you think about evolutionarily, blue light went down. We don't see well at night. We're not great predators. We're great.
And we didn't have unnatural light after dark.
Right.
We didn't have any light after dark.
We didn't have any light after dark.
But then it was only fire.
Right.
Until relatively recently.
Right. And then we crawled back into a cave where we were protected from animals, whatever. We maybe had a fire. We didn't do a lot. And so our brain slowed, melatonin was secreted. Our brain started slowing down. The sun went away. Our body temperature went down. And about 3 hours later, we felt like sleeping. That's the way we evolved. The more we can approximate that, the better we sleep. Nobody's going to spend 3 hours getting ready for bed. So the idea of my product is well, what would build up in your brain? What would you concentrate? So everybody's heard of the tryptophan coma, right?
Oh, yeah, it's real.
Okay.
The itis.
So the tryptophan coma, L-tryptophan, with the help of vitamin D3 and magnesium, becomes 5-hydroxytryptophan. 5-hydroxytryptophan becomes serotonin. Serotonin becomes melatonin. Melatonin does all those cascades, right? Sure. GABA gets released. It slows down the neocortex. It makes it harder for you to interact with the environment. All being asleep means is that you aren't paying attention. You aren't paying attention to your sensory anymore, right? They still work. You just aren't paying attention, and your body temperature drops down. So I made a product with tryptophan, 5-hydroxytryptophan, vitamin D3, magnesium, a very, 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 very small amount of melatonin to initiate, some GABA, L-threonine because it helps that. And then a few years after I got out, there was some research that came out, mainly through CrossFit research, to decrease lactic acid. Phosphatidylserine decreases cortisol production.
Oh, okay.
So I put a little bit of phosphatidylserine in it. So there's no tricks in there. There's nothing in there that's going to make you fall asleep.
Sure.
But it's going to support the nutritional status of your brain. You still have to behave like a sane person. You still have to get ready for bed. You still have to lower your, turn the air conditioner down. You still have to decrease your activities. You still have to decrease the light in your eyes and all that other stuff. But it improves the quality of your sleep. And people's hormones get back in order faster.
Oh yeah. I mean, I found for myself personally when I got out. Actually, I got out in 2010. I didn't really figure out that it was a hormone issue that was fucking me up until 2012. Really, maybe
that's
2013.
Fast, man.
It was fast, but I'm a fucking geek, so I'm looking for answers, right? Yeah. I'm out there looking for answers, and the VA wouldn't help me because I was at 4. Well, I started at 168, and they helped me get to 400. Like, oh, you're good now. I'm like, I don't feel good. I feel like shit all the time, right? So finally, I found a clinician that would help me. But what I found over the years is, as I've improved some of the other things like my diet and sleep and things like that, my use has gone down from like a full cc of testosterone a week to like a tenth of a cc maybe on average a week. Like it's the need for it has gone down precipitously, and I think I might be getting to a point soon where I can get off it entirely, and my body's just producing enough on its own.
So you're doing other things to support production?
A lot of things,
like enclomiphene and DHEA?
Enclomiphene, DHEA.
Arimidex or some sort of...
Not Ruminex. What's the other one?
Tamoxifen?
Fucking shit. I can't remember the name. It's a supplement.
Damn
it. I'll tell you.
Not zinc citrate.
No, but I do take zinc.
Okay.
I take zinc for what do you call it? For immune support mostly, right?
Yeah.
Zinc and magnesium especially. Magnesium has the added benefit of helping you fucking sleep too.
Yeah.
For something for Goja for Fedosia, is that it?
Oh, is it one of those herbal things that Huberman talks about?
Yeah, Fedosia has actually been
Yeah.
really helpful for me. I've been taking it for a year or two now, since before I heard it from him. But it was, I definitely, Fedosia. That's it. Yeah, that's worked pretty well. Everybody's everybody's body is the same and different, I guess, right? Yeah. So you got to find what you're deficient in. I'm 43.
Yeah. So completely reasonable that you could keep going.
Yeah.
I have one client that he's a D-boy. He's like 64. He still doesn't need testosterone. Like, I'm just supporting his pathways. Yeah. He'll come up with a total of 1,200, free of like 30. I'm like, I don't know, keep doing it.
He's not on gear or anything. He's at 1,200. Good.
Yeah,
Lord.
he's doing that. He's just doing that with enclomiphene, aromatase inhibitor, some DHEA supplementation. We're controlling DHT. We're controlling some nutritional things like just simple things like that. And he's been doing that for like 3 or 4 years. I'm like, more power to you, man.
Yeah, good for you, buddy.
Most dudes fall off somewhere around 50-ish. I started testosterone replacing myself at 48. Had I known what I know now, I probably wouldn't have needed it then. But I'm 54 now. I think I don't think I could probably get past it. Like, I couldn't be where I want. Like, I could be healthy, but I couldn't be like, I couldn't perform like where I want to perform.
Yeah. I mean, look, it's there are side effects of abuse of anything.
Oh, for sure.
But just taking TRT is I think, to be honest, if you're over 25 and you're a male in this country, you probably need to look at your hormone levels.
Oh, for sure.
And it is pervasive throughout all of society.
And what people don't understand too is like, there's a big difference between taking steroids.
Yeah, it's not D-ball, for Christ's sake.
And replacing. Right, we've been doing hormone replacement therapy on women forever. Why? Because we know that the ovaries slow down, and it's the same thing for men. It's like, my goal when I treat people is if I blacked out your information and handed your labs to a colleague and said, who do you think this is? They would say, 25-year-old dude who's in pretty good shape, right? Like, that's what I want your labs to look like. I'm not going to take your testosterone 3 or 4 times the natural level or something.
Sure.
Yeah, you'll feel great, but you'd feel great if I put you on crack too or something. It's like, it doesn't make it a good idea. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely not a good idea. All right, well, we got to get out of here. Tell everybody where they can find you so they can find more of this information.
Well, you said it, Doc. DOC, short for doctor, and then Parsley like there, docparsley.com. That site's got whatever, my TED Talks. It's got lectures. It's got ways to find me for various things. It's videos, blogs, all that crap. The supplements on there. Yeah. People are interested in that.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for coming today. I really appreciate the information.
Yeah,
we'll do
thanks
this again
for having
sometime. Absolutely, anytime. And thank you all for listening. This has been Citizen.